My name is Tom Callahan. I'm 94 years old, and a long time ago I was a rifleman in the United States Army. I fought in Europe in what you like to call World War II. We just called it the war. You want to know what it was like? I'll tell you the truth as best I can remember it, but you should understand something first. The first man I ever killed had a photograph in his pocket. I didn't know that when I pulled the trigger. I was 20 years old, scared out of my mind, and all I saw was a gray uniform and a helmet and a rifle pointing in my direction. Later, after it was over, I went through his pockets with shaking hands, because that's what you did, that's what we were told to do, and I found a worn little picture of a woman and a baby. The corners were bent from being taken out and looked at 1,000 times. I stared at that picture with blood all over my hands and thought, God help me, he's just like me. That's the kind of thing they don't put on posters. So that's who I am, and this is how it happened. I was born in 1920, out in a little town in Iowa you've never heard of unless you're from there. My father was a mechanic, my mother worked in the grocery when times got bad. We didn't have much, but nobody did. The depression wasn't a word to us, it was just life. You broke your back, you came home tired. You said grace over beans and bread, and tried not to think about what the mortgage man was going to say next month. I was a farm kid mostly, skinny, all elbows and knees, always out in the fields or playing ball on the dusty road. I thought the world ended at the county line. The biggest thing in my life was whether our high school team could beat the kids from 3 towns over. Then one Sunday afternoon when I was 21, my dad called us into the front room. He rarely raised his voice, but I remember he shouted my name like there was a fire. The radio, an old Philco that always buzzed and hissed, was turned up as loud as it would go. A voice was coming through, breaking up, but we understood enough. Pearl Harbor attack, Japanese planes, battleships burning. I still remember my mother's hand covering her mouth, my kid brother Johnny saying, "Where? Pearl Harbor?" and my dad not answering, just staring at the radio like it had personally betrayed him. We sat there for hours. The announcer kept repeating scraps of news, and by the time President Roosevelt came on the next day, the whole country was already at war in its head. I could feel it like electricity in the air. Guys my age walked a little quicker down the street. Fathers smoked on their porches and stared off toward the horizon like they could see all the way to the Pacific. I didn't sign up right away. I wish I could say I ran down to the recruiter with my chest out, but that's not how it was. I had a mother who'd already lost one baby to sickness and a father whose back was about shot. Someone had to help keep the roof over their heads and food in the icebox, so I waited. I told myself I was being responsible, and maybe that's partly true, but I was also scared. Then in '42, my draft notice came anyway. Greetings from the President of the United States. They printed that word, greetings, as if they were inviting you to a church picnic instead of sending you into the meat grinder. My mother cried quietly in the kitchen where she thought I couldn't hear her. My dad shook my hand a little too long, his grip tighter than usual, eyes red. My kid brother followed me around like a puppy, asking if I get to fly a fighter plane or drive a tank. I didn't have the heart to tell him what I suspected. I was built for walking and carrying, not flying or driving anything. I kissed my girl on the front porch the night before I left. Her name was Mary. Brown hair, smart eyes that always looked like she knew more than she was saying. We'd been planning to get married someday, which usually meant after we had a little money. Suddenly, someday didn't feel like a thing you could count on. I almost asked her to marry me right then, but I didn't want to tie her to maybe. Maybe I'd come back, maybe I wouldn't. "You'll be fine," she said, putting a hand on my cheek like she could put courage into me through her fingers. "You're the toughest man I know, Tommy." I just nodded like I believed her. They sent me to basic training down south, in a place so hot and full of dust I thought I'd landed on Mars. The Army wasted no time reminding you that you were nothing special. One minute you're walking down Main Street in your best shirt with your girl on your arm, and the next you're standing in a line with 100 other half-naked kids while some sergeant with a voice like gravel is shouting at you to move, move, move. We got our heads shaved, got uniforms that didn't quite fit, and rifles that felt like they weighed as much as a wagon. The M1 Garand, we got so close to that thing it was practically part of our bodies by the end. You learn to sleep with it, clean it, love it, because like the sergeant said, that rifle was going to be the thing between you and a hole in the ground. Basic was running and crawling and push-ups and getting yelled at. It was blistered feet and chafed skin and that special smell of 100 men sweating together under the sun. It was also where I met the men who would become closer to me than my own brothers. There was Joe Romano from Brooklyn, short and wide, loud as a freight train, could make a joke out of anything. There was Eddie Parker, a tall, quiet Texas boy who could shoot the eye out of a squirrel at 50 yards and never said a mean thing about anybody. There was Sam Rosen, glasses always slipping down his nose, from Chicago, who'd been studying to be a lawyer and knew more about the world than all of us put together. They threw us together, broke us down, and then built us up as a unit. You learn real fast that it doesn't matter where you came from or what you thought you were. When you're sucking mud and a sergeant is screaming that you get your buddy over that obstacle or you do the whole damn course again, suddenly that guy next to you is the most important person in the world. We trained with live ammunition sometimes. They made us crawl under barbed wire while machine guns fired real bullets over our heads. You heard the snapping and cracking of rounds and felt dirt kick up against your face, and some part of you understood this isn't a game. Still, there's a difference between training fear and the real thing. I didn't know that yet. By late 43, they put us on a train and sent us to the East Coast. We boarded a big gray ship that smelled of fuel and nervous sweat and headed for Europe in a convoy. The ocean looked endless, just gray water and gray sky and gray ships. We slept in hammocks strung one above the other, 3 or 4 high, so close together that when the guy above you rolled over, your hammock swung with him. A lot of guys got seasick, hanging their heads over the rail and losing their guts. I wasn't one of them, but that didn't make it easier. We had lifeboat drills in case a U-boat found us. At night they kept the lights low, everything blacked out. You'd lie there in the dark, listening to the creak of the ship and the breathing of hundreds of men, and imagine a torpedo slicing through the water toward you. If your imagination got going, you could feel it. Somebody always had a deck of cards, though. We played poker on the mess tables, paid each other with cigarettes and chocolate bars. Joe Romano kept up a running commentary like he was on a radio show. "Look at this hand, Tommy," he'd say, fanning his cards. "You ever seen such beauty? This is destiny, my friend. This is history in the making." "You said that last hand," Sam would mutter without looking up, pushing his glasses back up his nose. "You lost half your smokes." "That was a rehearsal," Joe would say. "This is the main event." It was bravado, but we needed it. Humor was like a shield we put up between us and what might be coming. We landed in England in the winter. I'd never seen a country like that before. Hills and stone fences and little towns with houses older than my entire hometown. Everything seemed smaller, tighter, but there was a kind of stubborn beauty to it. They put us in a camp somewhere in the south, near a little village. We trained more there, more running, more shooting, more lectures about hedgerows and German tactics and how to spot a tiger tank, and in the evenings we'd get passes into town. The English people treated us mostly like a cross between saviors and large, clumsy children. They were polite, a little standoffish at first, but once they warmed up there was tea and songs and warm beer and talk about the weather. Always the weather. They'd already been at war for years by then, bombing raids and rationing and all that, and it showed in their eyes. They were tired in a way we weren't yet. There was a pub in the village with low ceilings and smoke-stained walls. Old men sat in the corner and grumbled into their pints, and girls our age giggled by the bar, pretending they weren't looking at us. Someone would put a coin in the jukebox and play Glenn Miller, and for a little while we could imagine we were home. I remember one night a little old woman grabbed my hand as I passed her table. Her fingers were thin and hard as twigs. "You take care of yourself, love," she said. "Don't you go getting yourself killed. My boy's out there somewhere. You might see him, eh?" She smiled like it was a joke, but her eyes were begging. I promised her I'd be careful. It felt like a lie even then. We all knew something big was coming. You could feel it in the air. More troops kept arriving. German planes stopped showing up. Our guys ruled the skies like storm gods. The officers got tight-lipped. We practiced loading and unloading from landing craft over and over. Then one day they called us together and told us we were going to France. We were going to land on a beach with a name that sounded harmless enough, Omaha. The night before the landing, they brought us on board the transports. The channel was rough, gray waves slapping against the hull. The air tasted like metal and oil and fear. Inside the ship, men were writing letters. "If you get this, it means..." I wrote one to my parents and one to Mary, folded them carefully, and tried not to think about whether they'd ever be mailed. The chaplain made his rounds, offering prayers to anyone who wanted them, not bothering anybody who didn't. I'm not sure I believed in much right then, but I let him say a few words over me. Couldn't hurt, I figured. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, they woke us. We choked down cold, greasy eggs and coffee that tasted like it had been made from burnt mud. Then we got our gear, helmet, pack, rifle, ammo, canteen, entrenching tool, grenades, gas masks. At the time you had everything on, you were carrying about as much weight as a grown woman on your back. We shuffled into the landing craft, packed tight. The ramp in front of us closed like the mouth of a monster. It was still dark when we started toward the beach. The channel was throwing us around like toys. Men were getting sick over the side. I remember the sound more than anything. The roar of engines, the slam of waves against the steel hull, the whistle and boom of naval shells screaming overhead toward the French coast. Every now and then, a flash on shore as something exploded. "Hey, Tommy," Joe said, his teeth chattering, not from cold, from nerves. "They say the Krauts are all old men and kids." "Yeah," I said, because what else was there to say? The ramp in front of us clanged suddenly, and for a second I thought we'd hit the beach already, but the coxswain just shouted something about course correction. Every little noise made your heart jump into your throat. I remember looking down at my hands and being surprised they weren't shaking more. Maybe they were, and I just couldn't feel it. Then there was a different sound, a tearing, ripping noise like someone taking a giant sheet of metal and crumpling it up. The boat next to us just broke. A fountain of water and splinters and bodies went up in the air. A shell had found it. "Jesus Christ," someone shouted. "Oh, Jesus Christ." Our coxswain, a Navy kid who couldn't have been more than 23, screamed over the noise, "Keep your heads down, 30 seconds. Time twisted. 30 seconds might as well have been 30 years or 3 heartbeats. I could hear my pulse in my ears. My world shrank to the ramp in front of us and the taste of salt on my lips. Then the ramp dropped. Everything exploded at once: sound, light, water, bullets. Men in the front row jerked backward, some without even making a sound, just folding like their strings had been cut. The water in front of us turned pink, then red. "Out, out, move it," someone was yelling, maybe the coxswain, maybe a sergeant, maybe God himself. We stumbled forward into waist-deep water, the weight of our gear dragging us down. Bullets snapped past, little white splashes leaping up around us. A shell hit somewhere to our left, and a wave of water and bodies washed over me, almost knocking me off my feet. I stepped on something soft and going under, maybe a man, maybe a piece of flesh, and for a horrible second I almost puked, but there was nowhere for it to go. I was just trying not to drown, not to get hit, not to disappear. The beach itself was a killing ground. There's no other way to say it. Machine guns up on the bluff, stitching the sand with fire. Mortar rounds thumping down, showering us with hot metal and sand. Men running, crawling, screaming, not moving at all. I don't remember reaching the shingle, but suddenly there I was, pressed behind a little rise of sand and rocks with bullets hissing overhead like angry bees. My ears were ringing so bad I could hardly hear. "Tommy," someone shouted near me. I turned and saw Eddie Parker lying half in, half out of the water. His helmet was gone. There was a hole in his chest the size of my fist. The water around him was red going black. I crawled to him just like they taught us, low and fast. His eyes were open, puffing white foam with little specks of red at the corner of his mouth. "Tom," he said, or maybe he just mouthed it. "Tom." "I'm here," I said, though I don't know if he could hear me. I grabbed at his jacket, tried to drag him higher up the beach. The bullets didn't care. They kicked up little spurts of sand around us. Something hot stung my calf. I didn't even look. A medic appeared on my other side like a magician, sliding in on his belly. "Get his tags," the medic said. "Get his tags and move. You can't help him." "He's breathing," I said, panicked, my voice breaking. "He's breathing." The medic's hands were steady. One look and something in his eyes went hard and distant. "Not for long. You want him to suffer more. Get his tags and move, soldier. That's an order." I froze. Eddie's eyes were on me. They seemed to be asking a question I couldn't answer. "Tom," he whispered. I had to lean close to even hear it over the noise. "Tell my ma I wasn't scared." That broke something in me. I nodded, tears and seawater and snot all mixed on my face. My hands fumbled at his dog tags, cold metal against my fingers. I took one, slipped it around my own neck, put the other back inside his shirt like that would make any difference to anything. Then I crawled away. It felt like I was abandoning him, even as he was already slipping into that place you don't come back from. The guilt of that moment has never left me. I won't tell you every second of that day. I couldn't if I tried. Parts of it are still just flashes, running from one spot to another, dropping behind a steel obstacle as bullets chewed it up. The thud of an explosion that lifted me off my feet and threw me down again, my helmet spinning away. At one point I was sure my leg was gone because I couldn't feel anything from the knee down. Turned out it was just numb from being slammed into the sand. What I remember most is terror and a kind of angry stubbornness. Every time I thought, this is it, I'm dead, some other part of me snarled, like hell you are, and made me move again. We started to get a little movement going. Somebody, an officer, a sergeant, I don't know, managed to get a few of us up the beach into a shallow ditch. We blew gaps in the barbed wire with Bangalore torpedoes, long pipes full of explosives you shoved under the wire and then prayed didn't go off in your hands. We crawled, ran, crawled again up toward the base of the bluffs. You could see where our naval guns had hit craters and smoke and broken chunks of concrete, but those damn machine guns were still arguing that the beach belonged to them. Somewhere in that mess, I fired my rifle for the first time at a man I could see. He was just a shape in a slit trench, a flash of gray muzzle fire flickering. Somebody yelled that he was pinning us down, that we had to get him. I don't remember aiming, just squeezing the trigger like they drilled into us. The rifle bucked against my shoulder. The man's body jerked and disappeared. Later, much later, I would think about that shot. At the time, it barely registered. It was him or us, that simple. War has a way of shrinking choices like that. We fought our way off that beach inch by inch, hour by hour. By the time we really broke through and started moving inland, the tide had washed over where we'd first come ashore. The water was full of bodies and pieces of bodies and equipment. Helmets bobbing, boxes of ammo, rifles still in dead hands. I remember thinking, the ocean is eating our dead. When night finally came, I was stunned to find I was still alive. I sat in a little hollow in the ground with my back against a rock, rifle across my knees, my hands shaking so hard I could hardly light a cigarette. Joe slid down next to me, his face black with dirt and smoke except for little tracks where tears or sweat had run. "You see Eddie?" he asked. I swallowed. "Yeah, he didn't make it." Joe closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, there was something new there, something older. "Damn it," he said quietly. We didn't say much else. There wasn't anything to say. We just smoked in the dark and listened to the distant rumble of guns, trying to pretend we were somewhere else. Normandy after the landings was a different kind of hell. The movies always show wide open fields and heroic charges. What we got were hedgerows, thick walls of earth and roots and brush so dense that even tanks had trouble getting through them. You'd be walking along, thinking you had some idea where the front line was, and then suddenly you'd be face to face with a German patrol 10 feet away on the other side of a hedge. We fought in fields so small you could throw a rock from one side to the other, but each one felt like its own war. You'd clear a hedgerow, set up, catch your breath, and then there'd be another and another and another. It was like fighting in a maze that wanted to kill you. Rain, mud, flies, the sweet sick smell of rotting things under the summer sun. You stopped noticing your own stink. Your uniform stayed damp for days at a time. Your boots grew something that might have been mushrooms if you'd looked close. And always, always the fear. People talk about fear like it's one thing, a spike in your gut when something jumps out at you. War fear isn't like that. It's a constant low thrum in the background, like a motor. You get used to it in a way, but it never really goes away. One afternoon in a field like 100 others, I got closer to an enemy than I ever wanted to be. We were moving up, us on one side of a hedgerow, Germans somewhere ahead on the other. The lieutenant sent me and Joe and Sam up to scout a gap. We crawled forward carefully, keeping low. I remember the smell of wet earth inches from my nose, the way the leaves brushed my helmet. We reached a little break in the hedge, big enough for a man to slip through sideways. I peered around it, heart banging. Nothing but another field, some trees in the distance. For a second I thought maybe they fell back. Then a shadow moved at the corner of my eye. I turned and there he was, not 10 feet away, coming through from the other side at the same moment. A German soldier, about my age, maybe younger. Blue eyes wide and a dirty, tired face. We both froze, each of us with our rifles not quite in the right place. For a heartbeat, two scared kids staring at each other. Then training took over. I swung my rifle up, so did he. The world narrowed down to the black circle of his barrel and the tiny movements of his hands. My shot went off first. The sound was deafening that close. His body jerked backward into the hedge, his rifle firing into the sky as he fell. I don't know how long I stared. It might have been 2 seconds, might have been 20. He lay half in, half out of the brush, his legs kicking once, twice, then going still. His helmet had rolled off. His hair was light brown, plastered to his forehead with sweat. "Tom," Joe hissed behind me. "More'll be coming, move your ass." That snapped me out of it. We threw a grenade through the gap, heard shouts and a dull thump, then pulled back as gunfire chewed up where we'd just been. Later, when things quieted, I found my hands going through the dead Germans' pockets almost on their own. That's when I found the photograph. The woman in the picture wasn't beautiful like in the movies. She looked like any tired young mother, hair pulled back, circles under her eyes, but she was smiling. A little baby sat on her lap, bald and wide-eyed, one chubby hand reaching toward the camera. I stared at that picture until my vision blurred. For a moment, I saw Mary's face there. I saw my mother holding my baby brother years ago. I saw myself behind that uniform. "Throw it away," part of me whispered. "You can't think about him like that. He's the enemy that gets you killed." But another part of me is the part that had grown up in Iowa, the part that had sat in church and helped my father fix carburetors and laughed with my brother down by the creek, knew better. Enemy or not, he'd been a human being. In the end, I didn't throw the picture away. I folded it carefully and put it in my breast pocket. I don't know why, maybe as penance, maybe as a reminder, maybe because I didn't want that little baby to disappear completely from the world. We kept pushing forward, towns with half their buildings knocked down, church steeples shattered, cows lying dead and bloated in fields. Civilians peeking out from cellars and doorways, eyes big and hollow. Some cheered us, some just watched. They'd seen Germans come in and now Americans. For them, one uniform replaced another. But most smiled when they realized we weren't going to shoot them. I remember one French farmer pressing a bottle of apple brandy into my hands, babbling in broken English and French. "Merci, merci, Americain, merci," he kept saying, tears in his eyes. That night, drinking that harsh, sweet fire under a sky full of strange stars, I felt something like pride for the first time since Omaha. Maybe we were doing something good here after all. Maybe all this death had a reason. But the war has a way of punishing you whenever you get ideas like that. A few weeks later, we were charged with taking a small town. I won't bore you with its name. They all blur together now. The Germans had set up a strongpoint near the church, a nest of machine guns that made it impossible for us to move down the main street. Our artillery rolled in and we cheered. Finally, some big guns on our side. They shelled the square. We could hear the shells whistling overhead, then the crash and crumble of stone. Dust and smoke filled the air. When the barrage lifted, we moved in. The machine guns were silent, the sandbags shredded, bodies everywhere. We stepped over them, rifles at the ready, boots crunching on broken glass. Then we heard the crying. It was coming from under a pile of rubble that used to be a house or a shop, or both. High, thin wails, the kind that cut right through your armor. We dropped our weapons and started digging like mad, heaving chunks of stone and wood aside. We pulled a little girl out, maybe 5 years old. Her face was streaked black with dust, eyes wide and wild. One of her arms bent at a wrong angle. She screamed when we touched her, though we tried to be gentle. Behind her, under the rubble, were 2 bodies, a woman and a man, crushed. Maybe her parents, maybe not. It didn't matter. They weren't getting up. Our medic did what he could for the girl, but there was only so much you could do in a shattered town square. She kept crying, this thin, broken sound, until finally the morphine took her someplace else. That night I sat with my back against a stone wall, watching the church smolder and thought, our shells did that. We killed those people. We saved the town from Nazis, sure, but we also did that. War didn't feel like a clean story anymore, if it ever had. It felt like one dirty compromise after another. Fall came, and with it the dark woods of the German border, the Hürtgen Forest they called it. We called it other things, none of them polite. Imagine miles and miles of tall, dark trees packed so close together you can barely see the sky. The ground is uneven, full of roots and rocks and soggy leaves. It rains all the time, a cold, soaking rain that gets into your bones. Fog drifts between the trunks, so thick sometimes you can't see 10 feet in front of you. Now add artillery. The Germans were masters with their guns. They set their fuses to explode in the treetops, turning branches and steel into a rain of jagged splinters. You'd be hunkered down in a foxhole you'd spent hours digging, thinking you were safe, and then a shell would go off above you, and a chunk of tree the size of your arm would come down like a spear. We advanced by yards, not miles. Men slipped in the mud, froze at night. Toes turned black. Saw more men shipped out for trench foot and pneumonia than because of bullets some days. The forest swallowed sound in a strange way. Gunfire was muffled. Voices carried oddly, making you jump at shadows. One day, our Lieutenant Harris, a decent man not too gung-ho, tried to keep us alive, was leading us along a narrow trail when we walked right into an ambush. Machine gun fire raked the line. Harris went down instantly, a spray of red from his throat. He grabbed at it like he could stuff the blood back in, eyes bulging. Then he was just gone. We jumped into the underbrush, firing blindly at muzzle flashes. The firefight lasted maybe 10 minutes, felt like a lifetime. When it was over, we'd lost Harris and 2 more guys. The Germans had slipped away like ghosts. We sat there in the mud, breathing hard, hands cramping around our rifles. Joe spat on the ground, his face twisted. For what? He demanded of nobody. For this patch of trees, we gonna write home and say, "Good news, Ma, we captured 3 goddamn pine trunks." Sam pushed his glasses up with a trembling hand. "Orders are orders, Joe." "Bullshit," Joe said. "Their orders are lives." He looked at me. "You buying this anymore, Tommy?" I didn't have an answer. I just looked at Harris's body, lying half in a puddle, and felt something wearing thin inside me. We got replacements after that, kids who'd barely fired a rifle before, faces still soft, asking us what it was like. We didn't have the heart to tell them, so we just showed them where to dig and how to listen for incoming shells. Winter came for real not long after, and with it the Battle of the Bulge. We didn't know that name then, of course. All we knew was that one December morning, the Germans hit us with everything they had left. Tanks, infantry, the whole 9 yards, punching through the Ardennes where the brass had thought they couldn't move in force. Surprise, they could. We were somewhere in Belgium, near a town whose name I've forgotten, trying to enjoy what passed for a quiet spell. Then the sky turned to thunder. Artillery, lots of it, coming down in a curtain. Radios crackling with panicked voices. Rumors flying down the line. The Krauts broke through. The Krauts surrounded a whole division. The Krauts captured a bunch of our guys in the woods. Our company got ordered to hold a crossroads on the edge of a little village. "Hold at all costs," the captain said, his face grim. He might as well have said, "You're the sandbag in front of a flood." Snow was falling in big wet flakes, turning the road into gray slush. We dug shallow foxholes in the frozen ground, fingers numb even in our gloves. I could not stop shivering. Not from fear, from cold, but fear didn't help. The first German tanks came rumbling up just after dawn. You heard them before you saw them, a low grinding roar under the wind. When they broke out of the trees, they looked bigger than houses. Panzer IVs, maybe some Panthers, didn't matter. They all could turn you into red mist with one shell. We had a few bazookas, some mines, a handful of 57 anti-tank guns that looked like toys next to those behemoths. Our artillery was tied up elsewhere. The sky was too socked in for our Air Force. "Hold," the captain said, "hold." The tanks opened up, shells slamming into the buildings around us, sending bricks and glass flying. Our anti-tank guns answered, shells bouncing off armor or, miraculously, punching through. One German tank exploded in a fireball. We cheered without meaning to, even as the others rolled on. Infantry followed behind them, gray-clad figures moving through the snow. We fired until our barrels burned our hands through our gloves. Men fell on both sides. The snow turned brown, then red. At one point, a tank got too close. Its machine gun raked our position, chewing up earth and flesh. I heard a high, thin scream and turned to see Sam clutching his belly, blood spilling between his fingers. "Tom," he gasped, eyes wide with raw disbelief, like he'd spent all that time studying law books and never imagined a bullet didn't care. I grabbed him under the shoulders and dragged him back behind the remains of a stone wall. His breath came in little pants, each one wet. "You're okay," I lied, pressing a bandage against the wound that did nothing except soak up more red. "You're gonna be fine." He tried to smile. "Objection," he whispered. "That statement lacks evidence." Even then, he was making jokes. Then his eyes went distant and he sagged in my arms. I don't know how long we held that crossroads. Time went weird again. We were down to a handful of rifle rounds each, one working bazooka, and a lot of sheer stubbornness. The Germans kept coming. We kept shooting. It felt like trying to stop a locomotive by spitting at it. Then blessedly we heard a new sound, a rushing roar overhead. The weather had cleared enough for our planes to come in. P-47s, big, ugly, beautiful things, swooping low and dropping bombs and rockets on the German armor. One tank after another went up, black smoke staining the gray sky. By dusk, the attack had slackened. The Germans pulled back a little, regrouping. We were still there, barely. When they finally rotated us out a day or two later, I was running on fumes. Half our original company was gone, dead, wounded, captured, I don't know. The replacements we got were kids and graybeards, and we were somewhere in the middle, old men at 24. Sometime in early 45, as we pushed into Germany itself, we came across something I still have trouble talking about. We thought it was a supply depot at first. Fences, barbed wire, guard towers. The guards had already fled, leaving the gates swinging open. The smell hit us before we even went in, a thick, greasy stench that made your stomach lurch. Inside were barracks, long wooden buildings, and people. I use that word people, but at first glance they barely looked human. Skin stretched tight over bones, eyes too big in their skulls, moving with a kind of slow, tired stagger. Men, women, some children, all in filthy striped clothes. Some wore bits of blankets or jackets over them. Some just huddled together, staring at us like we were from another planet. I'd heard rumors, of course, we all had. Whispered stories about camps, about what the Nazis were doing to the Jews and others. But rumors are easy to half ignore when you've got your own daily survival to worry about. Reality is harder to look away from. We walked through that place in a daze. One of the medics was vomiting quietly behind a barracks. A chaplain we'd barely seen since Normandy fell to his knees in the mud and just prayed without words. An old man in striped clothes came up to me very slowly, like he was afraid I might vanish. He said something in a language I didn't understand, maybe German, maybe Polish, I don't know. Then he took my hand and kissed it. I jerked back, horrified, embarrassed. "No, don't do that," I said, but he just kept saying that word over and over, whatever it was, tears streaming down his face. We tried to give them food, but some of them got sick from eating too fast. We didn't know then about refeeding syndrome or how starved bodies can't handle too much. We just knew these skeleton people were grabbing at our care rations like they were gold. Later, when we found the piles of shoes and glasses, when we saw the furnaces, when we realized this was one of many places like it, something in me crystallized. All the doubt and guilt and confusion I'd been carrying about what we were doing, it didn't go away, but there was a new layer over it. Whatever else this war was, whatever stupid decisions our generals made, whatever ugly things we'd done ourselves, this much was clear. Some evil needed to be stopped. These were not just the enemy. These were monsters in human uniforms, and if we hadn't come, they would have kept right on doing this. We moved on, you always moved on. The front line was a hungry thing. It never let you stand still for long. Town by town, river by river. The Rhine, proud and wide, crossed under fire on temporary bridges while engineers cursed and hammered. In a little German village one afternoon, we met the Russians. We'd been told they were near, that our job was to reach the Elbe River and hold there. The Germans between us and them fought even harder, knowing there was no more ground to give. But eventually we came down to a riverbank, and there they were on the other side, Soviet troops, ragged, triumphant, waving red flags and bottles. For a long second, we just stared at each other across the water. Men who'd started this war on opposite sides of the world, now standing 20 yards apart. Then someone on our side held up a pack of cigarettes. Somebody over there raised a bottle in answer. In minutes, we were finding boats, makeshift rafts, anything to get across. The brass didn't like it, I heard later, but they were too far back to stop it. We traded what we had: cigarettes, chocolate, canned meat for their vodka and their cigarettes, and whatever else they pulled from their pockets. Their uniforms were a mismatched mess, some wearing bits of German gear they scavenged, others in patched-up Soviet stuff. Their faces were hard, eyes older than any of ours. We didn't share much language, but some things didn't need words. A Russian sergeant about my age pressed a glass of something clear and strong into my hand. He raised his own glass and said, "To victory." "To going home," I answered. He didn't understand the words, but I think he understood the feeling. Not too long after that, word came down: Hitler was dead. Shot himself in a bunker, they said. Part of me had expected him to die on a balcony somewhere, arms raised, screaming defiance. The idea that he just put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger felt small, unworthy of the damage he'd done. Then, a few days later, there was another announcement. This one came over the radio, scratchy but clear enough. Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. You'd think we'd have shouted, thrown our helmets in the air, danced in the streets like the pictures. Some guys did. There were impromptu parades, kisses stolen from nurses and girls in towns we were occupying. The brass let us break out the good stuff. It was a party in places. Me, I remember sitting on a crate in a muddy yard behind a half-collapsed house, smoking a cigarette and staring at my boots. Joe sat beside me, eyes red, bottle dangling from his fingers. "We made it," he said like he couldn't quite believe it. "Son of a bitch, Tommy, we actually made it." "Yeah," I said. I felt hollow, relieved, yes, grateful beyond words that I was still breathing, that I might see home again. But every face of every man we'd left behind scrolled through my mind like a film reel. Eddie on the beach, Sam in the snow, Lieutenant Harris in the forest, the German with the baby picture, the little French girl crying under the rubble, the walking skeletons in the camp. How do you celebrate that? They didn't send me to the Pacific. Some guys got tapped for that, told they'd have to fight the Japanese next. I thanked whatever power was listening that my luck held, and I was put on occupation duty instead. Guarding depots, standing watch over German towns that were trying to pretend they hadn't known what their country had been doing. We saw more of the war's leftovers then. Refugees flowing like rivers, Poles, Russians, Jews, French, all moving in every direction looking for someone or something. Children who didn't know where their parents were or if they were alive. Women who flinched when a man in uniform walked by, no matter what flag was on his sleeve. Some Germans hated us quietly, eyes hard and lips tight. Some were just tired, some tried to be friendly. I remember a German boy, maybe 12, offering me an apple one day, holding it out with both hands. His father stood behind him, watching me with a look I couldn't read. Pride, maybe, fear, resentment, all of the above. Eventually, they said it was our turn to go home. We boarded another big gray ship, this time pointed west. The Atlantic looked a little less endless now. I'd crossed it, fought in a dozen places whose names I could barely pronounce, and somehow I'd survived. New York Harbor made me cry, I'm not ashamed to say it. When I saw the Statue of Liberty standing there in the morning mist, green and solid and utterly untouched by bombs, something in my chest broke open. There were bands on the dock, girls waving, confetti. My legs felt wobbly walking down the gangplank, like the ground might start lobbing shells at me any second. People cheered. Some held up signs with names on them. One girl leaned over the rope and kissed my cheek just because I was wearing a uniform. I blushed like a kid. They processed us out, gave us clean uniforms, a little money, a train ticket. In a dingy army office, they handed me my discharge papers and said, "Thanks for your service, Private Callahan. Good luck." That was it. 1 minute I was government property. The next I was just Tom again, only Tom wasn't the same. Back in Iowa, the town looked smaller than I remembered. The grocery, the mechanic shop, the church, all exactly where they'd always been, like the last 3 years had been some kind of terrible dream. My mother hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. My father shook my hand first, then pulled me into a hug anyway, his rough cheeks scraping against mine. "You did us proud, son," he said, his voice thick. I wanted to tell him about Eddie, about Sam, about the camp. Instead, I just nodded and said, "Thanks, Pa," because the words clogged up in my throat. Mary was there too, standing a little back from the crowd, wringing her hands. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, curled in a way that made her look older. Our eyes met, and for a second it was like no time had passed at all. Then she smiled a little uncertainly, and I realized time had passed, for both of us. We tried. Mary and I sat on the porch swing like we used to, went for walks by the creek, held hands, but there was a wall now, invisible but solid. She spent the war rolling bandages and writing letters and worrying. I'd spent it wading through blood and mud and moral fog. "Tell me about it," she said one night, her fingers tracing circles on my arm, what it was really like. I opened my mouth and found I couldn't. Where do you start? With the beach? With the forest? With the camp? How do you explain the smell of burning flesh to someone whose worst memory is a kitchen fire? How do you talk about the way a man's eyes look when he realizes he's dying? "I can't," I said finally, staring straight ahead at the dockyard. "Not yet." She was quiet for a long moment, then she withdrew her hand slowly. "Okay," she said, but there was hurt in her voice. I woke up screaming some nights. Sometimes I'd be back on the sand at Omaha, watching the water wash over Eddie's body. Sometimes I'd be in the forest, listening to shells go off in the treetops, waiting for the next one to be the one that got me. Sometimes I'd open a closet door at home and expect to see a pile of striped uniforms and bones. Back then, they didn't have words like PTSD. You were nervous or shell-shocked, or you just couldn't adjust. The doctor at the VA looked at me over his glasses and said, "You boys saw a lot, give it time." Time helped a little, so did work. I went back to the garage with my father, got my hands greasy instead of bloody. There's a comfort in fixing things. A car comes in broken, you find the problem, you fix it. It runs again, clear cause and effect. Not like war, where you can do everything right and still watch your best friend die because he took 2 steps in the wrong direction. Mary and I drifted apart. She married somebody else, a good man who'd been classified 4F and stayed home to run his family's business. I don't blame her. She deserved someone who could look at her without seeing ghosts standing behind her. I got married eventually too, to a girl who came into the shop to get her father's truck fixed. She was patient with my silences, kind with my sharp edges. We had kids. I tried to be a good father, but sometimes when my boys banged pots in the kitchen or slammed doors, I'd flinch like somebody had fired a rifle next to my head. I never hit them, but there were times I had to walk out into the yard and just breathe until the tremors pass. I kept in touch with Joe for a while. We'd write at Christmas, send pictures of our growing families. He moved to California, got into construction. Said it felt good to build things after years of blowing them up. Then one year the Christmas card didn't come. I called the number I had and his wife answered. Joe'd had a heart attack on the job site, dropped dead before the ambulance got there. I sat at my kitchen table with the phone in my hand and felt this strange, bitter laughter bubble up in me. He survived Omaha, Normandy, Hürtgen, the Bulge, and a busted artery, and peacetime got him. Life has a dark sense of humor. Now I'm old, my hands shake, but not from fear anymore, just from age. My grandkids used to climb on my lap and ask if I killed any bad guys in the war. I'd tell them some sanitized story about capturing a German who threw his hands up and said, "Don't shoot," in funny broken English. They giggle. I wouldn't tell them about the man with the baby picture. Not yet. You ask me now what it was like, and I've given you this long ramble of a story, and still I feel like I haven't really answered. Because war is too big and too small at the same time. It's big in the way it moves nations, redraws maps, unleashes horrors. But for the man on the ground, it's small. It's the mud under your nails, the weight of the rifle on your shoulder, the sound of your buddies snoring in the foxhole beside you. It's the taste of cold coffee and the smell of unwashed socks. It's the moment when you decide to stick your head up or keep it down. It's fear and boredom and anger and love all tangled together until you can't tell them apart. People like to talk about heroes. I knew a few men I'd call that, but most of us were just guys. Scared kids trying not to look scared, men trying not to let the kid next to them down. We did what we were told. Sometimes that meant something brave. Sometimes it meant something ugly. Am I proud of my service? Yes. Most days. Would I do it again? If you told me that the only way to stop another camp, another Holocaust, was to pick up that rifle and wade ashore again, I'd go. Even now, these old bones and all. But don't ever let anyone tell you war is glorious. It's not. It's necessary sometimes, maybe, but it's not glorious. It's a dirty, bloody, confusing business where the line between right and wrong gets smudged every time a shell lands in the wrong place. You live with it afterward, you carry it around, all the things you saw and did and failed to do. Some days it's heavier than others. Some days you wake up and for a blissful 10 seconds forget you're 70 years past a war. Then a car backfires outside and you're back on the line for a heartbeat. I still have that photograph, you know, the one from the pocket of the man I shot in the hedgerow. It's yellowed now, edges frayed, but you can still see the woman's tired smile, the baby's reaching hand. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, and I wonder, did that baby survive the war, grow up, have kids of their own? Do they know their father died in a field in Normandy, staring up at a scared American kid who didn't even know his name? I'll never know, that's part of the weight. But I keep the photo because the day I stop seeing that man as a human being is the day I really lose the war inside myself. So that's my story as much as I can tell it. Not neat, not clean, just one man's thread in a tapestry of millions. You want a lesson from it? Here, what I've got after all these years. If you can avoid a war, avoid it. If talking, compromising, swallowing a little pride can prevent boys from crossing oceans to die on beaches, then for God's sake, do it. But if one day someone like those Nazis starts building camps again, starts treating human beings like trash to be burned, then remember there were once kids from Iowa and Brooklyn and Texas and Chicago who stood up and said, no more. Remember what it cost them. And don't cheapen their memory by turning war into a game or a slogan. We were not heroes, we were not saviors. We were just men in uniforms doing a terrible job that had to be done. And if you really want to honor us, don't march, don't wave flags, don't make speeches. Just look at your children sleeping safe in their beds, in a house with a roof intact, in a country where nobody knocks on the door at midnight to take them away. Look at them and remember that once far away, on beaches and in forests and in little shattered towns, boys you never knew suffered and bled so that your kids could dream in peace. That's enough for me.